After 2 months of heated debate, the Prime Minister has announced Australia will recognise West Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. However, the government won't be moving its embassy from Tel Aviv anytime soon. The opposition has accused Scott Morrison of embarrassing Australia on the global stage and says it will reverse the decision to recognise West Jerusalem if it wins the next election. In a moment, we'll have the latest reaction from our correspondents in Jerusalem and Jakarta. But first, political reporter Jade McMillan from Canberra.
A short sentence, but an historic shift in Australian foreign policy.
West Jerusalem is the capital of Israel.
Officially scrapping Australia's long-held position of recognising Tel Aviv as Israel's capital. But the more controversial idea of shifting the embassy won't happen anytime soon.
We look forward to moving our embassy to West Jerusalem when practical, in support of and after final status determination.
Hey Tony, how are you, mate?
Scott Morrison floated the idea of moving the embassy during the final days of the Wentworth by-election campaign, sparking accusations it was aimed at winning over Jewish voters in a seat the government ultimately lost.
I'm not sure when he rushed the announcement of moving the embassy that he really knew what he was doing. I'm tempted to think it was a sort of a rookie mistake by an ill-paid Prime Minister.
Making the announcement on a Saturday, the Jewish Day of Rest, means reaction from the Jewish community is muted for now. But Palestinians say it's unlikely to satisfy either side.
He wants to try to do all his own objectives to satisfy all stakeholders together, but it won't work.
The review of the embassy's location prompted anger in Indonesia, home to the world's largest Muslim population.
Good morning.
And it's not yet clear how the government's decision will affect a free trade deal still in limbo.
I think there's going to be a degree of puzzlement in the international community. It's Russia, the Czech Republic and Panama who have recognised West Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and Australia joins those three countries.
While Australia's voice and the megaphone we have is not as great as the great powers, that's true. But I've got to say, ever since I raised this issue several months ago, people have been pretty keen to know what we were going to say.
This announcement is at the end of a list of controversial items the government wanted to clear ahead of the Christmas break. It's already dealt with the Religious Freedoms Review and the Commonwealth Integrity Commission. Now it hopes focus will turn to the economy with the mid-year budget update on Monday. Jade McMillan, ABC News, Canberra.
For more reaction to the Israel decision, Middle East correspondent Eric Twarchek joins us from Jerusalem. Eric, how is this policy shift likely to be received?
Actually, it's probably unlikely to satisfy anybody. The reason for that is the Palestinian delegation feels that it's prejudicial actually to any peace settlement, and even though it's not as far as Australia was initially proposing to go, they say it still violates Australia's obligations under international law. The reason to not recognise Jerusalem as Israel's capital is to put pressure on Israel to comply with UN Security Council resolutions. So that's why this change is so significant. Even though Australia is talking in terms of a West Jerusalem being Israel's capital and East Jerusalem being the capital of a potential future Palestinian state. And that's where it also comes in. It's not going to keep the Israeli lobby happy either, because the Israeli government's position is that Jerusalem undivided is Israel's capital. So talk of East being Palestinian and West being Israeli makes the government very uncomfortable, and that's unlikely to satisfy people here either. So although we don't have a formal reaction from the Israeli government yet, and they may make some positive noises about recognising the situation on the ground and Israel's control over Jerusalem, this measure is unlikely to make them entirely happy, because what they really want is recognition that Jerusalem whole is Israel's capital, not talk of an East and a West.
Eric Twarchek in Jerusalem, thank you. Talk of a policy shift on Israel previously threatened relations with Australia's Muslim-majority neighbour Indonesia. Correspondent David Lipson is outside the Australian Embassy in Jakarta.
Well, as you can see here at the Australian Embassy in Jakarta, it's all quiet. This is the site of a number of protests in recent weeks from the Indonesian government. The reaction today has been somewhat muted, somewhat measured as well. They have taken Scott Morrison's announcement today as meaning that Australia will not be moving its embassy to Jerusalem, and also called on Australia to immediately recognise the state of Palestine. The ABC has also spoken to a spokeswoman for presidential challenger Prabowo Subianto, who has suggested that this policy is still deceitful and indeed suicidal for Australia. The reality is that for Scott Morrison, when he announced this policy half-formed a few months ago, well, he kicked a hornet's nest, and now, even though he's delivered a more measured and more nuanced policy, no one knows exactly how that policy is going to be received by the masses here in Indonesia, and indeed whether the position is going to be misrepresented by Islamist or nationalist forces in the lead-up to next year's poll in April.